Welcome and thanks for joining us to the second half of our discussion with Dr. George Chambers, Executive Director of Application and Platform Solutions at Health and Human Services. And before the break, we were talking about the idea of managing multi-cloud services. And this has been something of a holy grail as agencies have moved from my email in this cloud to my many applications in many clouds, the multi-cloud hybrid approach, if you will. And just tell us more about how you do manage that and what you ask of the cloud vendors to make sure that they play nice in the way that you want them to as your contractors.
Good question, and thanks again for having me. There are many aspects, facets to the conversation of cross-cloud, multi-cloud management. One of the first technologies that we are using are around the management of APIs, where we have, instead of formal integrations taking place between applications, we're pushing toward the use of APIs. And APIs written in multiple platforms and multiple cloud environments are also hard to keep track of, right? You don't want to have a proliferation of APIs and not be able to manage those. So we found a platform, and there more than one out there, but there's a platform that it can now at least allow us to have a library of APIs to be consumed by the development and admissions and application groups and not have to be replicated. It can be a shared service. So that's a move that we've made with the whole notion of multi-cloud, multi-environment management. I think there's a lot of opportunity when you talk about data stores and data marts, and this whole notion of a potential future data mesh, right? A data fabric. And the idea is that right now the technologies are emerging where we are able to create environments where data analytics, AI, and other tools can be used. But it still seems to be a data lake environment centric that has to be fed by the other environments. And in my mind, you want to move toward the notion of a distributed data set of sources, still using the authoritative data source, but be able to use those tools that can normalize the data, that can curate the data without having it be moved into a central environment. And so I think that's an opportunity for the vendors, an opportunity for the contractors of the future. To put it in more simple terms, I don't want to necessarily have to move data in order to normalize it, to curate it, and to make it usable for others to be consumed. I'd like to be able to do that in a local way in order for us to then use those tools, from an enterprise fashion on local stores in order for us to enable and open up that data to others. I'm sure you're going to get vendors calling you after this interview saying, oh, we've already got it. It hasn't been our experience to date, and it's an opportunity for us to work with vendors and work with providers toward that common goal.
Is that the quiet sound I hear of an approaching edge computing strategy?
That's interesting. Yeah, edge computing versus edge curation, normalization, and the use of data is probably the next step or the next generation of that conversation, right? It has been more about edge computing for applications and less about the data stores and curating that data and more normalizing it. So yes, you and I can coin that as the next evolutionary stage of edge computing, called, I guess, edge curation. Maybe we'll
right,
use
sort
that.
of an inbound look at edge computing towards the cloud as opposed to the deployment of a cloud towards the edge. Orientation.
I think it's both ways, because I did say I want to use common tools in order for us, because you have to understand that normalization and curation of data is an extraordinary effort, and you want to use AI where you can, or some sort of machine learning in order for you to normalize that and not be a manual effort, right? So
Okay. Yes.
yes,
Sure.
from the cloud to the data, and then the data extracted in a normalized fashion to be used by others. Interesting.
All right. So now let's presume that you have a set of applications in multiple clouds and you have made that move because that's what is efficacious for those applications and that data and the mission you're serving and the mission operators and owners. What then become the criteria or the measurement metrics that you know your goals are being reached in terms of performance, in terms of what the cost was expected to be, and whatever other management types of issues surrounding applications you might have?
We are challenged with that every day, right? The notion of having performance metrics in place up front to understand how your technology has achieved its goal or not has always been somewhat elusive. There's never been a standard way of looking at things. We have performance metrics that we have adopted that cover, generally 4 areas that all of our programs that at least I have oversight try to achieve. And that's always around cycle time, right? It's always around throughput. It's around quality. And then there's an aspect of the resources that are needed to be consumed to make that process happen, whether it be equipment, people, technologies, and that whole total life cycle cost. So in my mind, how quick we can turn information around, how much information can we scale, right? The whole notion of quality. How many errors do I find? How many times do I have to reintroduce a run or reintroduce or I'm finding data integrity issues? And then ultimately, what's my total cost of ownership? Those are the metrics that we try to employ every time we bring a system to bear or new technology to bear. How successful we are, look, the traditional uptime and user experience, all those things are still in place, but the fundamentals that I just described are challenging, but meaningful, because that's how you can make change. When you know what your cycle time is, what your throughput is, what your what your quality is, and then ultimately what your investment is, and you can use those 4 in unison. You can say from a technology standpoint, we've achieved our goal. Now, ultimately, the mission is the true testimony, right? Are the mission goals being achieved? If through the pandemic, I can speak very proudly that our team at HHS was able to deliver meaningful information in a very timely fashion. And we supported incredible amounts of data exchanges throughout that process. So from a mission, of course, the pandemic caused a great deal of harm and suffering, but the systems behind it performed, and we were able to save lives. I believe that.
Sure. And just to get back to those performance metrics, I mean, cycle time, throughput, and quality errors or need to restart the application. I mean, you do have some control of that on the front end, though, correct? In the basically the efficiency and accuracy of the programming. Fair to say?
Exactly. No, exactly. I think here's the beauty. When you don't look at it as, okay, for this particular project, for this particular mission, what are you going to be your performance metrics, which is what we have inherently done over time, right? We want to infuse in our culture those 4 key measures for every development team right up front. While we are thinking about our design and our architecture, what are the implications around cycle time, throughput, quality, and investment, right? And if every team is required at least to contemplate and to try to realize specific metrics that speak to each one of those, I think, feet of the table, right? The foundational elements of the building of your system, you're going to go better. You're going to go further. And this is something that we've tried to do retroactively as well. I mean, I've looked at existing systems and I've challenged my division directors to think about those four fundamental measurement approaches and to come up with specific measures that speak to cycle time, that speak to throughput. The translation is sometimes unique, right? I mean, you don't want to, squelch creative liberties about how they perceive cycle time, but the reality is they're getting to the important factors, right? How quick can I turn something around? How much can I throughput? I don't want to have quality issues, and it's got to be reasonably cost.
Well, what's the old saying? We can do better, cheaper, faster. Pick any two.
That's
right?
exactly right. Exactly right. You're a smart man. I like that.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the cost question too, or as you put it, resources, because if your cycle times and your throughputs and your quality are what you had hoped to expect, can the cloud then do that in a way that is at reduced cost, reduced resource consumption relative to operating data centers?
Something I am challenged to truly understand the paradigm shift in what our old cost models look like versus what our new cost models look like with the cloud. Inherently, when you would put a system on the ground, you had X amount of development, right? And then you would have some percentage of that development in O&M. Right? So that development cost would have been X, and then you would probably have 20% of X as your ongoing maintenance and support costs, or 30%. I think the cloud and subscription and the whole notion of taking the infrastructure out has really changed that whole mentality. When you talk about what my O&M is, my cost of development may go down, but my O&M is nowhere near a fraction of what it used to be. It's more of a half or almost what it was equal to. So I think our whole notion of how we look at total life cycle cost needs to be sort of re-understood and re-educated, because consumers that consume before the cloud have this in the back of their minds that O&M, the operations and maintenance of a system, should be significantly lower than my initial investment. Whereas cloud tools that have lowered that initial investment and the cost of infrastructure is now being supplanted by the fact that that's an ongoing investment, that you're sharing that investment, and you don't no longer say it's I have to worry about it only from a depreciation and replacement standpoint, but it's an ongoing cost. And I think we as consumers need to become better educated, and I think the vendors in the market need to better understand that there is a paradigm, maybe right, wrong, or different, but a paradigm of there's a large delta between my initial development versus my O&M, and we're happy to be educated as long as it's truth. We're good to be a part of that team.
It almost sounds like, the argument in the shift to say electric car as well. I'm not buying any more gas. But yet, when you look at the total cost of ownership and life cycle costs, to get 400 pounds worth of people, 300 miles costs a certain amount, no matter how you do it.
Interesting. I hadn't really thought of that analogy, and I don't want to go there because some people are real zealots one way or another. But let's put it this way: that I think we all need to look at our costs, and where we can, we want to reduce our outlays in traditional ways and enable more capabilities while doing so. And so, look, if my total life cycle changes, it should be a positive one. It shouldn't be a negative one unless I'm really bringing new capabilities to bear. And the whole notion of, well, you can get all these wonderful things for the same price is okay, but if I only need a set number of wonderful things to get my mission accomplished, we want to be prudent with the taxpayer dollar. And so I think everybody in the spectrum, both consumers and providers, need to be a team in terms of what that cost profile looks like. I'm just highlighting that right now there's a disconnect between our prior notion of O&M versus what's currently being realized in many of the cloud subscription environments.
And I wanted to ask you too about the unique mission, the healthcare mission that informs everything within HHS, whether it's the NIH, different components, the institutes there, FDA, you've got the CDC, but they all have at least healthcare in some manner.
And CMS as one of the largest.
Oh yeah, them too. Yeah, that's a pretty good one also. A big one. And so how does the health mission and the specifics of health inform how you think about mission delivery via the cloud and the application development?
Yeah, I tell you, I've been very fortunate and humbled by being part of the healthcare sector. And I think there are protections that are unique. You know, the individual and privacy protections should be an integral part of the fabric of all we do, as well as the ability to transform that information into usable and enabling information to serve for the betterment of health and reduce human suffering. So I think the healthcare is unique in many ways, that it has a plethora of technologies. It runs the spectrum in terms of life cycle. Legacy could be many, many years old, and emerging technologies, as we talked about, with high cluster, supercomputing to do, informatics. All of that spectrum needs to be accommodated, right? Mm-hmm. Accommodated with security in mind at the individual level, right? Because each person's privacy is utmost importance, but also to provide data to a plethora of users. And at one point in time, we were even, as an objective, opening up data as part of the Freedom of Information Act. And I think it's still part of the reason is to create cottage industries, to fuel even the economy in the health sector by providing data to new innovative organizations to reduce costs and provide additional services at home, as well as in the hospital and outpatient settings. So I don't know that I answered your question exactly, right? I think healthcare has a unique set of criteria and sensitivities that we need to accommodate. But ultimately, what we do in healthcare, it has broad applicability, right, to many other industries. And maybe it's more than you need, but we've at least addressed the concerns of the individual as well as the total data usage.
Yeah, I guess, and we just have about a minute left, but there's also the notion too that HHS's medical functions and health industry related functions operate within an even larger context of the health industry, which is moving this way too. So you've got a kind of a tribal community to deal with in the sense of the larger health industry, which is a very big industry in the United States. So
absolutely,
it should be pioneering in that context.
Yeah, and I think ultimately we want everybody to be successful, right? Providers, payers, the patient, their families, patient first. But truly, it's a community, and one group, the pharmaceuticals and the medical development. When you think about the broad spectrum, healthcare will fail without any one of those. So we need them all, and we all need to work together and be successful.
All right. Good note to end on. I want to thank you for being with us. Dr. George Chambers is Executive Director of Application and Platform Solutions at Health and Human Services. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I'm Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio for more on the Cloud Exchange.